Lawler is a contributor of mine. He's done a lot of great work with analyzing video. So he's coached Riot and Brute Squad in the past.
Yeah.
I believe he's the current coach of Riot. And he had a very specific question for you. So in 2009, Brute Squad played against you in the semis.
Yep.
He said it's one of the best games he's seen. Honestly, he calls it a super battle. The next year, so 2010, you were in the final.
Yep.
So obviously, in 2009 they beat you. 2010, you were in the final. So he's asking, what do you remember from those years, and what do you think is the difference that got you to the finals in 2010 against Fury?
Well, that was a very sore point in our career. I think we all went into that Brute Squad game thinking, we would come out on top, and one of the toughest games for us where we went up 4-1, thought we had it. It was there, and we still had O and D lines at that point in time, and we ended up struggling where our D line was doing a fairly good job in being able to get the turns and get the breaks and score. And then we went on where we saw a new zone that Brute hadn't played against us. They hadn't pulled it out of their pocket yet. And there's a little bit of wind, and our O-line couldn't convert. And so, you lose a couple points that way, you give them a couple chances, and then our D-line wouldn't go on. And again, we couldn't convert necessarily because that was a lot more pressure than we'd ever been under. And we never started on O, and it was like, well, if the O-line can't do it, how can we do it? And so that we took and did a lot of reflection that year on how we could improve that. And actually since then we've switched our strategy to do pods. So we don't have an O and a D line. We have 2 pods of women who will play together consistently throughout the year. And on each of those lines, there are handlers and cutters, but also people who are better at D, people who are better at O. But on any given day, we'll put on 7 on that pod who are the best 7 to win that point, whether it's O or D. And we'll incent them to win it by giving them a second point if they do. And if they don't, the other line goes on. And so we've done that over the last couple years where those pods play together. It means both lines get a chance playing O, both lines get a chance playing D. Our line, or our pod this year, had a really great chinch. The other pod had a really great format, just with the personnel that they worked. And so each line had something they were special at on O or D. We ran roughly the same plays and systems, but we had minor tweaks based upon the personnel and how that pod wanted to run it. And so and we had many games over the past couple of years where if one pod, was just struggling, either struggling because it was just an off game or an off half, or they just couldn't get, running, they couldn't get their legs under them, or they had the drops, whatever it was, the other line could carry them. And many games were in one half, one line was doing all the scoring and carrying the team, and in the other half, the other pod did. And so it really enabled us to put the people on who are playing well at a given time and also not crumble when, one O-line or one D-line couldn't perform or get the break. You kind of had players who could do both without stressing out. So it has made a world of difference. I will say, however, it is a struggle when there is a larger difference in the skill sets on the team. So we've been lucky on Caps to have a fairly similar set of skills. So it's, you're confident, very confident in both lines on O and D. When you don't have as deep a bench, you end up, and when push comes to shove in those tight games, one line probably going out more on O than on D, and that starts to get back and away from that system. And we had a little bit of a tough time with that this fall series, just because of with the winds and everything. We did end up a little bit more with one line being O and D, or one pod being O and D, but that wasn't our intention. It just was what we needed to do to win the game, because of the players that we had. So
Cool.
I can see the difference and why people do it, but I recommend going to a pod system by far. Yep.
Yeah, and to me, I saw the O&D fail a couple years ago. Semi-finals of Canadian Nationals 2008. Mephisto went up 6-0 because we kept putting our O line out. We put the D line out. We ended up scoring, I think, 6 in a row and tied it up at 6s. And it's like, when do you have the ability to recognize when you have to switch it up? And I think with pods, it probably is easier to switch it up because you're not thinking O&D, you're thinking this group versus this group. And so I think that's actually a really good point that you bring up. And maybe it's not a way that a lot of people think about it.
Yeah, it's definitely unique. I think we're one of the few that do it.
Because there's a lot of teams that have their 8 players or 9 players on O-line, and then everyone else is on D.
Yeah, and that's where they cut their teeth on D. And instead, we put good players on each line and a couple development players that then get a chance to sort of work into O or D. And we don't know if they're going to be great on D or O. We'll find out, and we'll try them in both. But then they get to develop versus just always being stuck on a D line, which is the way most teams do it.